Hello, and welcome to the Hot Corner Podcast, powered by Easton. And now to our hosts, Brittany Heil and Matt Williams.
Hello, and welcome to the Hot Corner Podcast, where we'll be discussing the ins and outs of the fast pitch and baseball community. I'm your host, Brittany Heil.
And I'm your co-host, Matt Williams.
We have a Missouri native, Truman State, 4-time All-Conference, 2-time D2 All-American, and she left Truman State with virtually every hitting record you could imagine. We have Kristi Bredbenner, coach of Wichita State, with us. Coach Bredbenner has been at Wichita State since 2012, and she's going to talk to us about her journey. And she is a player who jumped right into coaching as a head coach right after she graduated.
So go ahead and get ready to take some notes, because Coach Bredbenner has a fascinating journey. She started coaching literally as soon as she got done playing, and she got some awesome experience and lots of wisdom to share. So get a pen and paper, get your thumbs ready, whatever you want to do, and get ready to take some notes. It's going to be good.
Hi, Coach Bredbenner. Welcome to our podcast, The Hot Corner. How are we doing?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. First, we just want to check in to see how you're doing during the stay-at-home order. I'm sure you have a little new appreciation for the stay-at-home that some listeners may not know about. If you want to share.
Yeah, my wife and I had a baby in November 15th. So Blake was born. We call her BB. So for me, in a season where usually we're out of town every other weekend and obviously working some lengthy hours during the week, instead I get to spend every day seeing her grow up and change overnight, which has been awesome, and something that I'll always appreciate. I miss the team, miss being out on the softball field in a big way, but for me, there's been a pretty cool silver lining to this whole situation. So we've spent a lot of time with her.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How's the team doing throughout all this?
Yeah, they're doing pretty good. We check in weekly, doing some Zoom meetings and just, seeing how everybody's doing. We're trying to be creative on social media. That's something we've kind of pushed here these last couple weeks, just letting people know what they're up to. And, more than anything, just trying to connect with them. I think one of the more difficult things about this situation is, our kids are away from the academic side of things and relying on email and Zoom meetings and in a completely different way of teaching and learning. And, so it's important for us to check in, and Gretchen Torline, our academic advisor, to, keep tabs on them and make sure that they're getting their homework done. We've got a few that are used to having quite a few online classes, but, when you think about the majority of them aren't, you want to make sure they're not putting things off and doing the things that they need to do as a student to be successful for the rest of the semester, because that's one of the biggest things they can control right now.
Right. So kind of jumping into this, where and how did you get your start with softball?
Yeah, I had a pretty interesting situation. So I played college softball at Truman State University, which is a Division II school in Northeast Missouri. Grew up in just outside the St. Louis area in O'Fallon, Missouri. So I wanted to go to school somewhere fairly close to home. So Truman was about 3 hours away. My freshman year, we were 20-15, not very good, but we had all sophomores and freshmen that year. It was kind of a unique situation. And then our coach decided to retire, and we hired Christy Schrader, who was Christy Howard. She played for UCLA. Actually, if anybody watched D1 softballs or NCAA softball's Twitter last night, they replayed the 1992 World Series, and Christy Howard was one of the panelists that they interviewed. So she came all the way from California to the small town of Kirksville, Missouri, which was totally random. But her husband, Pete, went to Truman in his undergrad, and they met at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, where he was getting his master's, as was she, and then she was working for the University of the Pacific softball team for Brian Colsey. So they met there, and when they decided to get married, I think Pete conned her into moving to Kirksville for a little bit so he could give back to Truman, and then eventually they wanted to settle back on the West Coast. So we were fortunate enough that my sophomore year she came in and, I mean, just completely rejuvenated the program. I think we added a pitcher or two, and the difference was 20 and 15, I believe, to like 45 and 12.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty substantial. And in my career there, we won the conference, I think, one time, but we went to regionals my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And so she just did a fantastic job with our program, and she was young and energetic and, you know, all about the fundamentals. And you know, so of course, what happens when you rejuvenate a program like that and you start getting some recognition nationally, she got offered a job at the University of California, Santa Barbara after my senior year, and accepted that position and resigned from Truman. Well, I had one semester of school left, was a business major. My brother at the time owned a finance company doing home mortgages. You know, it was pretty easy for me to just kind of transition and do some stuff for him and make some money, because at that time they were doing pretty well. And so that was my game plan. So when their coaching search fell through, they asked me to start fall practices for them. You know, the team was there. Oh, wow. They were ready to go. And so myself, Aaron Brown, which was Aaron Schweda at the time, and then Missy Kane, which she's Missy Portner now. The three of us were fifth-year seniors. Aaron and Missy had a whole year. I had one semester. And so we started practicing, and, you know, we ended up really pretty much enjoying it. And I think the girls had a good time, and they reopened the search and ended up not having the qualified candidates they were looking for. So since I was graduating in December, they offered me a one semester stipend to stay on and be the head coach on an interim basis. And then Missy and Aaron were my assistants. So, you know, the crazy part of the situation is we lived in a house that you could literally throw a softball, you know, from our yard to the outfield fence of the softball field. So we were right there. It was the best house. It was a softball house, but we lived with three other players. And so the three of us moved out at semester, and then we moved into an apartment that a couple other girls lived in, and we just swapped, so that we could kind of get ourselves out of that predicament a little bit. Because, you know, one of the things that I think is most important when you're a young coach is to be able to separate yourself in a lot of situations from the players. And in my situation, it was much more difficult because those players were also some of my best friends. But at the same time, it allowed us to kind of, you know, have the boundaries that you need as a coach and a player. So we coached that team, and we had some unbelievable talent on that team. My assistant coach now, Elizabeth Economan, was an All-American that year. I think we laughed. She hit over 500, I'm pretty sure. And
that's not bad.
Had a phenomenal year. But, you know, we had an up and down kind of season. And we went to the conference tournament, which was at Happy Rock in Kansas City. And we ended up winning that deal. And it was awesome. It was something I'll never forget. We lost to Washburn and got put in the losers bracket and came all the way back, beat them, and then beat Central Missouri State 2 times to win the conference tournament. And then we ended up getting to go to regionals that year. So, you know, that's how I got the passion and the juices flowing that, you know, business wasn't for me, and probably sitting behind a desk wasn't going to be for me. So ironically, Kristi had hired an assistant, didn't quite work out. And so she called me about mid-April and asked if I would be interested in moving to California and being her assistant at UC Santa Barbara. And, you know, so I got offered the Truman job on a full-time basis. And then I had to decide, did I want to try this assistant position or did I want to stay at Truman? And, you know, after thinking about it, I think, you know, it was important for me to learn what I was doing. And I think at Truman, even though I loved it and the experience is what got me into coaching, you know, I was learning by failure in most of my situations. There wasn't a ton of guidance. I didn't have a great mentor there with me. It was just more, hey, here's this team, figure out how to be a coach and recruit and order equipment and do all this stuff without a ton of guidance. Or I could go to UC Santa Barbara, be an assistant coach for an outstanding head coach who played at UCLA in the Big West Conference. So you get to play a lot of great teams, but also the teams you get to play in the non-conference were the Cals, the UCLAs, the Arizonas, the San Diego States. I mean, just some really, really great opponents. And it was a bonus that Kristi had such a successful college career because everybody knew who she was. And so when we'd go recruiting or we were playing those teams, I mean, it was just like a softball family. They were very welcoming. I got to pick the brains of a lot of really great coaches, and had an unbelievable kind of jump start to my career as a softball coach.
That's an incredible and just exciting journey for you. I mean, you do not hear often, rarely at all, a player turning around and becoming the interim head coach for their school, their alma mater. So that's awesome. And so you touched on that, and we want to jump back one step when you were a player. You're very humble, because I think when you left Truman, you held about every hitting record there was. Is that correct?
I was an okay hitter. Yeah, I did an okay job.
Yeah, I think when somebody holds all the records, they respond with, "Yeah, I was okay." So you did that, and I'm sure the facilities weren't quite what they are today. I mean, even back when Matt and I played, not dating you, like when we played, the facilities are top notch. And so for our listeners, and especially during the stay at home, what are some of the things, when you played, that kind of takes you back to the basics, or, just the getting down and dirty on the field?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when we played at Truman, being a Division II school, like you said, facility-wise, there wasn't, we didn't have this awesome stadium with stadium seating or, any of the true amenities. I mean, we had like one batting cage, I think, that we shared with the baseball team. And to be 100% honest with you, I don't feel like we used it very often. I mean, we did a lot of side toss, a lot of tee work. We did, Coach Schrader did a nice job of throwing live to us, which I always felt like was a big part of it. But we did front toss. We used wiffle balls all the time. I mean, you go back and you think about, what you can do with a pretty small budget, and we did it. I mean, for some reason, and I don't know why we did this, but we would put Walmart bags inside the dimpled wiffle balls, maybe to make them more dense and not fly, not have the movement when, in Kirksville, where our field sat, it was sitting up high, so we had a little bit of wind. So for whatever reason, Walmart bags inside our wiffle balls, which, sounds a little goofy, but I think it controlled where the ball was going a little bit. We didn't even have a bat per kid. I mean, when you got on the team, I mean, I'll never forget, we had 6 helmets. Everybody you shared a helmet. I mean, it was like everybody wanted the lucky helmet. And then we probably had 5 or 6 bats, that the school provided. We provided a lot of our own equipment. I mean, I remember I would buy my own catcher's gear. I'd buy my own ball glove a lot of the times. So I think about, there are some pretty huge differences, but we had a really successful softball team, and a lot of it was just the hard work we put in. I mean, every drill mattered to us, whether it was something that just seems so simple, but there's a purpose behind it. And, like I said, it could have been hitting wiffle balls into a chain link fence. It could have been, working on some different stuff with placement on tees. I mean, all things that, kids nowadays could easily do at home with one person helping them or all by themselves. And I think a lot of that is just the work ethic that you put in. I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I've got to have the best of everything to be the best athlete. And you just have to have the desire to work hard and really go out there and be creative in ways that, can make you a good ball player. We've got a guy that comes and helps us who's fantastic, and his name's Kevin Hooper. He played for Wichita State for the San Diego Padres, or he works for the San Diego Padres now as their infield coordinator. And I mean, he talks so much about being able to use a lacrosse ball and bounce it and counting bounces and throwing the ball off the wall. And I mean, stuff that doesn't cost very much, but it's all eye-hand coordination and getting your body in a good position, getting your eyes behind the ball, seeing it in your hand. I mean, it doesn't take thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment to make yourself a good ball player. And I think that's what we had to do at Truman. I mean, we were a very small school, and, I think about our budget, even when I was at Emporia State, obviously it was a Division II school. It was probably a little bit higher than it was when I played at Truman. But, we had $45,000 to $50,000 to travel and to buy our uniforms and do all that kind of stuff. So, we were always thinking outside the box and being creative with the equipment that we have and making everything very purposeful and really just finding some different ways of implementing things to make it be as similar to the game as you possibly can, but maybe you don't have all the bells and whistles.
That's really cool. So it also brings me back, especially with your experience as a hitter. There's, and as a player, now as a coach, there's a piece of equipment that comes free of charge for every player, and that's our brain and our mindset and the way we think. So I think anybody listening, anybody who's had any experience with a ball and bat sport knows that hitting it's not swinging, it's called hitting for a reason. So I'd be curious, could you share a little bit of what you learned either through success or learn the hard way about your mindset as a hitter? Because a good swing is part of it, but to have the success that you're describing, and now as a coach, as you're trying to develop hitters, what helped you from a mindset perspective? What would you share that would help hitters when they're in the batter's box unlock their physical potential so their brain's not getting in their way?
One of the things is confidence. I mean, confidence controls everything. And, in my situation, I think I created confidence because I love to hit, so I was that kid who, after Coach Schrader would throw batting practice all day, I'd be like, hey, can I have a little bit more after practice is over? And even if it were 15 or 20 more swings, I was always that one that really asked for that extra work. And to me, the preparation side of things gives you that confidence when you get into the plate, when you've done everything that you possibly can to be ready for that moment. That has to give you that extra boost. Softball's a game of failure. You look at a 3 out of 10 at bats is pretty good. I mean, you're doing pretty good in that type of a situation. So you're getting out 7 times, but you have to have the ability to erase the bad and focus on the good and continue to keep moving on. I struggle sometimes with people that really struggle with the mental game, because that was just something that I didn't struggle with for whatever reason. I mean, I just got in there. I had a very good routine. Don't get me wrong. That kind of stuff was very important to me, to be routine and take good deep breaths and get myself relaxed. But I never really focused on anything bad that happened to me. It was always just like, I'll get it next time, move on and prepare. And if I wasn't good at hitting the outside pitch, that was my focus. I was going to sit there and work on outside pitch, cuts and things like that. And so to me, that preparation and just that ability to move on. I mean, you can't change what didn't work for you in the past. You can't do anything about it, but you can practice and get yourself in a better position the next time that situation comes up.
I think that's something that all the youth out there right now and the parents listening, even the parents can use a little bit of that advice. I think, moving on from one bad at bat and not drilling it into their player's mind as they're walking out of the ballpark because they went 2 for 3 and focusing on that one, because I'm sure we've all seen that happen.
Yeah, that's the toughest part of the game sometimes, is getting the parents out of the way, because everybody's already looking at the kid when they didn't do well, and they feel bad. They don't need to dwell on it and talk about it all the way home. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure all of you guys had parents too that still talked about it on the way home, but you've got those parents that go a little bit overboard and make the kid feel like they're not good enough. And at the same time, I hope we all have a supportive parents, that put them in those situations. And then when they get in the car, they say, hey, you'll get them next time. Let's move on and talk about what we've got going on the rest of the day.
Absolutely. I know my dad, he every now and then will be like, remember that one time you swung at that pitch that was over your head? Yeah, I do. Don't know why.
Thanks, Dad. I was there, actually. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, we all have those dads. Everybody's got at least 1 or 2 embarrassing dad moment in their lives. I know I have a couple. My dad was very much invested in the games and wanted the programs that I was a part of always to do very well, especially when I was up to bat or behind the plate. And I'm pretty sure I was that kid every now and then that gave him the dirty look, like, yeah, I wish you'd just be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about your playing experience, I mean, you jumped right into to coaching right away. And thinking about, your coaching experience, one question we really like to ask is about a coach or coaches that influenced you in your upbringing and your career. So I wondered if you could share if there's a particular coach or a couple of coaches that had a very impactful, influence on your life, and just what it was about that coach that made such a big difference.
Well, yeah, I referenced Kristi Howard Schrader earlier. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be where I am without her, coming to Truman and making such a big impact on me as a player, but then also giving me a chance to get into Division I coaching. And, there is always stuff you learn that you would or wouldn't do, but there were so many things that she taught me that I still do. I mean, she was always very personable and wasn't afraid to talk to anybody. She, smiled all the time and really seemed like she enjoyed everything that we were doing. She was a big fan of making sure your kids controlled a couple things, which was your effort and your attitude. And to me, those are things that I preach now. And, so she's had a major influence on my life, not just because, she was my coach, but because I also got to work and coach with her and be a coworker for her. And, she gave me an extreme amount of responsibility out at Santa Barbara. It was just her and I. We had a student assistant my first year, in very similar situation to when I got to Truman. She had a baby the very third weekend of the softball season, and it was like, oh, this timing is a struggle, so I had to take the team by myself the weekend before she had the baby to San Diego State for a tournament. And so the responsibility that she entrusted in me to, travel with the team and make the right decisions in the game. I coached 5 games by myself with our student assistant who had just graduated, coaching first base. And, those are the things that are immeasurable. I mean, she's been a great friend and mentor. And, she is also a mom. Obviously, she had Jana when we were first there. And then she has Asher now, who she had, I think, maybe the year after I left. A little bit better timing that time, but she always seems to spring it on her new assistants when they get there. But just somebody who I always had a lot of respect for. She was a great player, really good family person, and somebody that had something that's important to me, which is work-life balance. I mean, she was always going to give as much attention to her family as possible, and then her job as well. And so I feel like she's been a great role model. Funny as it may be, when I played softball, I wouldn't say I despised her, but I just didn't like her. But Risa Summerall at Central Missouri State used to give me a hard time. And, she was one of those you really had to impress to get her to really like you and have that respect for you, in my opinion. And she's a hard-nosed coach. I think she's in the Central Missouri Hall of Fame, MIAA Hall of Fame, Missouri Western Hall of Fame, I think, as well, but had great softball teams at Central Missouri, who's UCM now. We had some pretty tough battles, and they were the team we beat in the conference tournament twice when I was just that young pup coach. And I don't think she'll ever forget that, because then when I came back to Emporia and got to coach against her as a true coach who had a few more years under her belt, I loved her. And I go back, and to me, it was more of a, I probably didn't like her because they won, and, she didn't hold anything back. She would say anything that she had on her mind. And I remember Elizabeth and I got to play with each other my senior year, and I think she batted third and I batted fourth, and she would hit us back to back. Literally, first pitch hit us like in the shoulder or in the back of the butt, and we'd get on base. We'd be on first and second, and I'd look at her on my way down to first, and she's like, "It's easier than throwing 4 balls," and you're like, she just, you had so much more respect for her, after you kind of let it all loose and forgot about the competitive side. But she was a good person, and to me, somebody who, I enjoyed, because she was very much her own unique person. She had her good philosophy, and I felt like she had a lot of success with it. And, you see her, and I'm friends with a lot of girls that played at Central Missouri State, and, they all still talk about her and the the stories about Coach Summerall and the things that she did, but they all loved her. And I think that that's a sign of a good coach, is when you have a group of alumni or a large group of people that played for you that enjoy telling stories. They're still all friends and still connected. And to me, that's something that's important to me in my coaching career, is that I want to continue to keep in touch with the people that played for me and know what's going on in their families. And, 10 and 12 years from now, if we're all in a different place, you never know, we all can sit down and share stories about the good times of either Emporia State, Shocker softball, Santa Barbara, whatever that is. I think that's important. It says a lot about you as a coach.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like you have that passion to make those connections, because we read you have a couple of Staff of the Year awards. Is that due to you implementing a rule that coaches can't get pregnant now at certain times or have a baby right before the season kicks off?
Hey, yeah, that has nothing to do with it. I've been pretty fortunate to have some really good assistants and staff members and people that, have brought their experiences and their influences into our program. Ryan Stefankowitz, Nicole Hudson, Samantha Ricketts, whose, career's taken off right now, head coach at Mississippi State, but obviously came from Oklahoma and brought a lot of great ideas that Coach Gasso is using at OU. Samantha Shealy, who played for me at Emporia State, she was my pitching coach for 4 years. And, I don't know a person in this country that's as competitive and feisty as Sam Shealy. And so, you take all the good out of everybody, and those are the things that make a successful program, is you're seeing all the good things that they can bring and letting them have a voice. And like I said, I was fortunate. I had a good amount of staff, especially when I was at Emporia. I had some really great people that worked for me, and a lot of times weren't getting paid or were volunteering and giving up their time at the Division II level when you don't have the money to pay a lot of people. And their impact was felt in a major way within our team.
Do you try and help groom your players to be assistant coaches if they want to be? So do you try and help them put on a coach's hat while they're playing, in a sense?
I don't know that I would say that we do specific things like that. I think I read a little bit of an article not too long ago about Heather Tarr at Washington, and trying to recreate the game as much as possible. That, if you're having to spend hours of time working on fundamentals at practice at the college level, then you're missing out on being able to practice the big things that they need to be prepared for, which are the situations that you're going to run into in the games. And so those are probably our biggest teachable moments when it comes to practice and really getting the girls to think. I've spent a majority of my time through this coronavirus going through recorded practices that we actually have and games and clipping situations, so that now we'll have some really good examples of good and bad and things that we can talk over and chalk talk and really learn and teach a little bit more. But if any of our kids ever want to get into coaching, obviously we provide a fifth year a lot of times for our kids. And so some of them can stick around that fifth year and help our program as a student assistant. We've been fortunate. We've had some graduate managers that have come either in our program from other programs. This year we have Presley Bell, who played at the University of Houston, so one of our conference opponents, and she would like to be a coach. And so it's important for me, for our graduate managers, to feel like they're a part of the coaching staff. I don't want them to just feel like they're here for throwing batting practice or to hit ground balls or to catch bullpens. I want their input. And I think, making them feel like they have a say, or, them being observant, any new eyes you can get on the field, the better. And, if we can give them a different perspective than what they played for 4 years, and really kind of add to their coaching philosophy and their experiences, then that's awesome in my opinion. And I'm always welcome to those kind of experiences. And, that I look at that and look how lucky I was to be able to jump right into being a head coach, an assistant coach, and a head coach within a 4 or 5 year period. I had quite a bit of personal responsibility and opportunity. And, I'd like to try to give that back as much as possible.
One of the things that's really interesting about your your job being a college coach is the transient nature of it, because you have players for 4 years. And then what's interesting is if you're doing a really, really good job as a head coach, it means your assistant coaches might not stay very long, right? Because they're getting their opportunities to move up the ladder. And hearing you talk around this and mention it, wanted to drill down a little bit and ask you, what are some of the things you do to build trust with players and with coaches, simply because you have to do that on a regular basis because you're always having new players come into the program, and then your assistant coaches are moving on up the ladder. So what are some of the things you do to build trust so that coaches do feel like they can speak up, so that your players can buy into your program? Is there anything you found to be helpful with that?
Well, I think the big thing is letting them speak, creating dialogue, having an open door policy. We're big into individual meetings. We'll do an individual meeting at the end of the fall, sometimes at the beginning in January, and then definitely obviously at the end of the season. And we do a full evaluation of each girl, and each girl does a full evaluation of themselves. And we're very transparent. I mean, I think you develop trust with your players by being honest with them, and that starts in the recruiting process. I'm pretty honest at the beginning when it comes out and says, hey, look, you still have to earn your spot. I might be giving you this and this money, which sounds like a lot of money, and that's great. It's because I believe that you can earn that spot, but you still have to do it. I don't promise that you're going to walk into our program and start for us on day one and you're going to be a 3-time All-American. I mean, do you have the ability to do that? Yeah, but it's still going to take hard work. It's still going to take the process, unless Monica Abbott or Kat Osterman walked into my office, which doesn't happen as much as I'd like. I'm never going to say something like that, to one of our recruits, because, there's so many things that can change in that 1 or 2 years, depending on how old they are. So it starts from the beginning of being open, being honest with them, being transparent. And then really once they get on the team, is letting them have a voice, talking to them, getting to know them personally. And I think that's things that you struggle with as a coach sometimes, because you get busy and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, a month flew by, and, there's been years when I've had the team over for dinner 20 times, throughout the year in different ways, in small groups, and the full team there or whatever. But when you step off the field and you get them in a different environment, you get to know a lot more about them and their families and what they enjoy. And so to me, that trust and investment is reciprocated on both ends. And obviously when you get in the games, I mean, the girls know I'll go to bat for them every single day. I mean, I've been kicked out of probably 6 or 7 games because I fight so hard for them a little bit too much sometimes. But, I think they know at the end of the day, I've got their back just as much as they've got mine. And I think a lot of that's with their ability to be themselves and to really buy into our program and know they've worked hard and that they have a say and can be honest and they know exactly where they're at and what they're supposed to do. Assistant coaches, kind of the same thing. I mean, when you talk about like our pitching coach, Coach Lashley, this is her first year. I mean, I let our pitching coach have free reign. I mean, they come in, they've got their own philosophy. If I kind of notice that things aren't going as smoothly as they're hoping, sometimes you have to, calm them down a little bit, because if it's a drastic change in something that they're doing, it may not have, she may not get to reap the benefits of it right away, and she might get discouraged. And you have to say, look, it's working, but it's not as working as fast as you thought it would be, but it's a big change from what they're used to, and you've got to give it a little bit of time. Or, but I've let Coach Lashley, I mean, she completely came in this year, changed the way our pitchers work out, changed the way they throw bullpens, totally different philosophy. And I think the girls really bought into it, and it's just a trust that I had in her. And I hope that she has in our program, that what she's doing is going to make them better pitchers. And, but the same thing can be said that when we got into the season and our pitchers actually struggled a little bit more this year than they had in the past. But I think a lot of it was just them not having, in my opinion, probably the experience with pitch calling and things like that they needed to have at this level. But all of them wanted to throw differently. Coach Stefankowitz did a good job with them the previous 2 years of doing some different things with them. Like Bailey Lang, for example, wanted to go back to having a swing back this year, and Aaron McDonald wanted to go back to having a swing back this year. And so they went back to what was comfortable. And then Morgan brought in to me a more uncomfortable workout program for them. And so it was kind of the lesser of two evils. And so by the time the season rolled around, they were in great shape. They could do a ton of stuff at practice, but in the games, they just weren't as good as they used to be. And, about 4 or 5 weeks into the season, I said, hey, we need to get rid of all the swing backs. And she was like, okay, changed it, trusted me. And at the end of the day, it started to factor into their success, and they looked a lot better. And so, you got to give a little and see how it goes, especially with young coaches and coaches just in general. Let them have some freedom, let them have some say. It's just like hitting. If somebody wants to change their swing, they've got to prove to you that new swing technique's going to work. So let them have a little bit. And then if it fails for them, then they can realize it and come back and say, yeah, I don't like that, or that's not working. And the proof's right there, because you gave them some rope, and they just, they've got to be able to decide for themselves a little bit sometimes as if whether or not it's working. And if you trust them enough to let them do that, and I think that creates that trust within your staff as well.
And for you on what you're telling them, I'm sure, because you may in the back of your mind think, I don't think that's going to work, but you can try it. And then they'll come back and say, yes, coach, you were right. Let's do it your way.
Well, sometimes it happens that way, but sometimes it takes a little bit more convincing.
Right. So you've been coaching for about 18 years now, right? So how do you stay hungry each season? How do you bring some new insight, keep each season fresh and new?
I think the big thing for me is passion. I love the game. And so to me, you always stay hungry. I'm innately a very competitive person. And so, the drive to have success and on and off the field, I think is definitely something that's important to me. But I think you got to try different things each year. There's times where we read a book at the beginning of the year. One of my favorite seasons thus far at Wichita State was 2016. We won the conference, the MVC. We won the MVC tournament, went to regionals, won the first ever regional softball game at Wichita State. And we read The Hard Hat by John Gordon that year. And it was
nice choice.
Fantastic book. And I can't remember if it's 21 reasons to be a great teammate, and I bought all the girls hard hats. They carried them around with us. We talked about that book and the importance of it. And we had really great leaders that year, and people to me that maybe didn't lead on the field, but were phenomenal inside the locker room, that just put the kibosh to complaining and things like that when things started to get out of hand. And I think a lot of it had to do with that book. And so, we've done the Energy Bus, we've done the Carpenter, we do a lot of John Gordon type stuff because they're quick, easy reads that I feel like are so relatable to sports. And he's got such a great sports following. So we try to kind of have a theme, a motto. We try to do some stuff with social media. I think one of the hardest parts about being a coach is time. Sometimes you have all these really great plans of what you want to do, and the next thing you know, it's 2 or 3 months later and you haven't talked about it yet, And so, that's probably one of my bigger weaknesses, is coming up with really good ideas I think that I have, but then implementing them all year long, because 20 hours a week with your team goes by very fast. And especially when you think about the weight room and the meetings, and we try to do a little bit of mental training with somebody outside of our program, once a week. And then obviously you've got conditioning and then practice. Weeks go by fast. And so, to me, that's one of my weaknesses that I need to get better at. But, if you can kind of have a theme or have a motto, and a lot of times it has to do with the makeup of your team. Are you really young? Are you a more veteran team? Are you pretty split up? Some of those things are dependent on what you choose as your book or your motto, or how you're going to go and implement some of the different team building and team bonding type stuff that you're going to do that year. But that usually kind of gets my juices flowing, is thinking about those types of things. The COVID crisis here, when we've had 5 or 6, maybe 7 weeks off now, I've had so many ideas in my head. I've just been writing them down. I haven't completely gotten down to just one. But, we've talked a lot about it as a staff each week about just some different things that we want to do next year. And so I think that that's kind of the thing that gets you going a little bit more, and just seeing our girls play again. I think, you look forward every year to just see what the recruits are going to be like that are coming in and how they're going to mesh and who's going to play where. And you start thinking about that. That's something too that always gets me excited for the beginning of the year.
That's awesome. So as we're thinking about your experience and just how long you've been in the game as a coach and as a player, a lot of our audience is youth on the youth level. So, and we think about there's three main segments. There's the parents, there's the coaches, and then there's the athletes, whether they're listening to this directly or the parents and coaches are passing stuff along to them from this. So I thought where we could go next is just kind of walk through each segment and, just ask you based on your experience, and obviously you're playing at the highest level, not everybody's going to play there, and that's perfectly fine. But what is kind of a big piece of advice that comes front of mind for, let's start with players that are younger, that love the game. What would you say to players that's a big piece of advice to help them learn and grow?
I think the love of the game, have fun, especially in the younger age groups. I mean, it should be something that you go out and you enjoy and you create great relationships and friendships, and you just start to get that competitive edge that you look for as you get older and older. But, love it, enjoy it. And I'm probably, there's two spectrums to coaches. I am on the play all the sports you can possibly play spectrum. I'm not on the, hey, only play one sport, be the best at that one sport, and put your 365 days a year into that one sport. That's the opposite of me. I feel like the well-rounded athlete has more success and less injuries when they get to college. And at the same time, you give yourself the break that you need from focusing on something that maybe you are very passionate about, but you need a little bit of time away from to rejuvenate that passion every year. And so to me, enjoy what you're doing. Be an athlete, whether that's playing golf, tennis, softball, volleyball, soccer. I played travel soccer, travel softball at the same time all summer. And I'd go from a softball game to a soccer game and then go back to my softball game. And, God bless my parents, because they were the ones that got me to all those games and paid for me to be on those competitive teams. But I loved it, and I stayed in shape because of it. And I felt like, to me, I was a catcher. I caught a ton of softball games. Now I'm 40. I'm starting to feel it a little bit more. But for the longest time, when I was at Emporia, I caught the bullpens a lot of times. Yes. I was in my 30s by then. And, so I felt like it helped me be a much better athlete and have a much more healthier life later on down the road, because I was so involved in sports.
Love that. And I have to say, just for the record, that Brittany and I were catchers as well. So
there we go.
You're speaking our language. My baseball team, my coach, has two catchers. And so when one of them doesn't show up, yours truly gets to hop back there to keep the bullpens moving.
Now, I will say, as you get a little bit older, they sell these awesome mushroom things you can sit on that are the perfect height. They're much nicer on your knees as you get older if you need one of them.
I'm going to have to look that up for sure.
Yep.
Cool. So thinking about the parents that are listening, your experience at the top of the game, your experience seeing kids come through, what comes to mind in terms of ways that we might encourage parents to help bring the best out of their kids that they obviously care and are passionate about? But what would you say to parents that are listening in terms of how to help their kids flourish?
Be the encourager, encourage them. And encouragement can go in a couple different directions. Encourage them to get outside, in a world where digital, social media, video games, television is a big part of, I think, society now. Get them to go outside, play catch with them, give them some time. I think about my experience growing up. I would play catch with my mom and dad and 500 in the backyard and basketball. My parents were active, and encourage them to get out and do things with you that, involve the sport that you're in to kind of keep them going a little bit. And, don't get too crazy that you're out there at 10 o'clock at night, making them hit 5,000 balls off of a tee. But at the same time, encourage them to do some different things. And then to me, encourage them when it comes to their success on the field and their struggles on the field. I mean, I've always felt that as a coach, you can always tell the kids that don't have the encouraging parents. They're the parents that still came to the games, but when it came to going to dinner after the game, they would prefer to go with me to dinner than go with their parents. And that was always sad to me because, spending time with your family is at a premium. When you're in college, you don't get to do it a whole lot. And so I'm a big proponent of letting our kids spend time with their parents, when they make a trip, and especially when they had a bad day. You're not always going to be the great softball player that you hope to be, and your parents hope for you, and your coach obviously hopes for you. And so on those bad days, you being the encouraging parent and the one that can help them forget about it is huge. And, I think encouragement goes a long way. I also think being somebody that's a good example, parents and the way that they act at games can be a make or break for your college experience. We've seen a lot of parents out there who, yell or curse or, they're gloating about their kid in the stands and they're just arrogant. And those are the first kids we probably cross off our list because we don't want to deal with that dad or that mom who's vulgar and just doesn't seem very respectful. So, parents, be mindful of who's in the stands and, be a supportive parent, whether your kid's getting to play or not. And, you're going to blend in just as well.
Those are great words for our listeners out there. And the last piece of this would be for the coaches. A lot of them are volunteers, parents, coaching. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, one, appreciation, especially for the coaches that are giving up so much of their time and a lot of times money nowadays for kids that, maybe don't have the money or they're just to be out there and teaching them a game that we all love. So there's a lot of appreciation for those coaches. And, I think stick to the fundamentals when they're young. If you can really stick to good basic fundamentals, making sure they're throwing correctly, they know how to field a ball, whatever hitting approach you take, really work on the fundamentals and practice. I think that's my biggest advice that I would give to young coaches is that, sometimes we feel like it's important to play as many games as we possibly can because that's given them the experience that they need or the exposure that they need. But when they're not very good or they're booting balls or, their fundamentals just don't look bad, they're not getting the exposure that they need. They're actually getting worse. They're getting crossed off. And so, spend time practicing instead of focusing on playing so many games in a year, because to me, the kid that comes in who's well practiced and has great fundamentals, and we don't have to sit down and teach him as much, and we can jump into doing more situational and experience type stuff at practice. That's huge. I spoke at a conference a couple months ago in Columbia, and we talked base running a little bit. Base running is something coaches don't spend any time on, period. And when you think about a pitcher and a catcher don't even have to run the bases once they get on, so I love my catcher on my team. Her name's Madison Paragon, but when she was a freshman, she was the worst base runner I've ever seen in my life because for 8 years playing select softball, she didn't ever have to base run. She'd get a good hit, and then it'd be like, all right, Butters, get off the field. We're putting in your, whatever they're called, your courtesy runner, And so, she ran base to base. She never knew when to tag up. She never got a good jump. She didn't know how to read balls. And now she's a much better base runner than she it's hard to imagine. She's just completely different, and it's been awesome to see her transformation. But she's not the only one, but the pitchers and the catchers that hit are the biggest ones that we see. And so spend the time on the things that maybe aren't as glorious, the fundamentals. And I think those are you do that, those are the basics and the real foundation for a great program.
I love that. Base running, what some people may think is so simple and everybody should know, it gets definitely overlooked. And that's what will either win you ball games or cost you ball games. So it's very important. Well, Coach Bredbenner, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Is there any final advice or words of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners?
You know what, like I said, we're a big program where our mantra is effort and attitude. And if you're going out there every single day and you're giving it everything that you got and you're loving the game, there's going to be a place for you someplace. And it may not be at the Division I level, and that's okay. I had a phenomenal experience for me, and it set the tone for my entire career playing softball at Truman State. So, there's a place for everybody, but go out there, have some heart, play hard, and give it everything you've got.
Well, Coach, just before we go, I just want to mention too on the air, like your resume and your career speaks for itself. You've clearly excelled as a player and as a coach, but just want to reiterate what Brittany said and say thank you for your time and thanks for sharing, because who you are as a person and the character behind those accomplishments, I think, is the most important thing and the most encouraging thing, because it's making the game better, and you sharing your experience so that we can hopefully pass that along to, if it helps one coach or one parent or one player get more out of the game and grow and develop, then we've done our job. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for that and say thank you for what you're doing and the work you're putting in, and we appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much.
And happy Mother's Day to you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. Have a great one.
All right.
Coach.
Thanks, guys.
Well, there we have it. Thank you, Coach Bredbenner. Journey is incredible. Listeners, I hope you were able to take some notes and things you'll be able to implement into your practices and in your seasons. We have Matt. Matt, you're going to talk about a quick win for us on how to key up your season with a good theme.
Absolutely. So our quick win, we just are really hoping to provide something that's practical and easy to apply based on the episode. And so one thing that Coach Bredbenner talked about is finding a theme for each season. And that's something that helps keep her hungry and fuels her passion, because each season's unique. Each team in that season is unique. And so our quick win for you is just to consider, what would the theme look like for your year? Is there something like character building or resilience or battling through adversity or just controlling what you can control? Something that is a theme that you can rally your team around as you guys are getting ready to hit the field whenever you're listening to this, because a theme can be very unifying and it can help you really speak to your team in a profound and deep way throughout the year if you're focused on a theme that's going to make you better. So our quick win is pick a theme for your year and then start talking about it.
And probably now more than ever, that theme will be crucial, especially coming off of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home order. So it'll be nice to get back on the field. And big shout out to Cole, our producer. Thank you, Easton, with the hottest bat out there right now, the Ghost Advance. Thanks to our MSP staff, and especially thank you, the listener. Until next time, remember that we're better together, and we'll talk to you next week.